Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Bad morning, everybody. Ha! Got you. It's a good morning. April Fools. Oh, my God. It's the worst day of the year. Quite honestly. Certainly the worst day of the year to be on social media and watching people make their... Or worse than watching people make their terrible April Fool's jokes is watching brands make their terrible April Fool's jokes. I don't know why people feel the need... why there would be a corporate need to engage in this sort of thing. But it's out there. It's happening. I nearly put it out of my mind and forgot entirely that, I nearly forgot that it was a new month entirely, which is a fine occasion to mark. The fact that it's April 1st, of course, April Fool's Day, and everybody knows I love April Fool's Day. April Fools. Again, I got you again with another perfectly plausible thing that really wouldn't shock anybody if it were true, but you believed it and it's not true. What we've devolved to with April Fool's Day. It's very sad. I'm sure there are some good April Fool's jokes out there. Just kidding. Got you again. There are none. But anyway, time to move on with the show, which is not a joke. And we can get to some of the news, which very frequently feels like a joke. Kagro in the Morning's vaudeville variety show starring Kagro X, Bill says. Flo's Flappers, W.C. Fields, and Agatha the Juggling Goat is live now from the Strand Theater in beautiful downtown Poughkeepsie. Once again, April Fools, you totally bought it. You thought this was happening, and it's not. It's just the regular radio show. And we're, it's what the hell. We'll go along with it and bring the program to you live. All right, well, I know Greg's got a raft of stories gathering out there today. Here's something, not an April Fool's joke, but, you might think it was if it wasn't for the fact that you knew that this was a terrible and mounting tragedy, sort of, I guess. I don't really know who's involved in these things, but Rebecca Romans and her eagle eye pointing out this bit of news in the Twitter feed of Jezebel. What do we call them? A magazine? Jezebel online collection of article thingies. It's sort of a magazine, but I guess is, but also isn't. Informing us that yet another gender reveal party, celebration, explosion, whatever, has ended in tragedy. I don't know. Let's go find out what the tragedy is. I mean, it's a death, I assume. But, I mean, how did it happen? Did they blow something up again? This is the worst. And I can only assume that these things are happening because people feel like, or I guess probably the fathers feel like they want involvement in the celebration somehow. And that, I don't know, at least these guys, their only method of participating in a celebration is to blow something up, which calls into question, well, a whole range of questions really are posed by that one. It's too late for one of those questions to be posed. In fact, it's too late for two of those questions to be posed. One, is this a person you want hosting a party? But of course, the earlier question that should have been asked is this a suitable father for my children? But too late for that one. And it's very often too late to ask that question, really, even without blowing things up. But let me just take a quick look here. I know, Greg, you'll want to know exactly how this latest gender reveal party has ended in tragedy.
Looks something about airplanes, but I have to say, while you're looking it up and getting the details, I'm old. And the reason I know I'm old is I just don't get the idea of why it's a good idea for dudes to kill themselves over gender reveal parties, which I don't understand in the first place.
Well, that is because you're old. You don't understand how great it is to die immediately after announcing. I don't know what's going on. But Jezebel is a good outlet for something like this because very often their pieces will be written by women who will say, we also do not understand why this is an idea. But the already tragically high body count for gender reveal parties, which also, like, what's the sex of your baby? I will just tell you. That's fine. That's a good way to do it too. Or a party like, it's a boy, have some food. That's another good way of doing it. But the already tragically high body count now rose by 2 on Monday when 2 pilots flying a plane for a gender reveal stunt were killed in a crash. So it wasn't supposed to explode, but I guess it did anyway. According to The Sun, which is one of the tabloid newspapers, I think, unless it's not the UK Sun. Let's just take a look. I want to know what we're talking about. Yeah, okay. Oh, it's the US version of the UK Sun, which I guess is the same thing. According to The Sun, the pilots were flying over the Caribbean Sea off the coast of Cancun around 3:30 p.m. local time. Okay, good conditions probably. Trailing a banner that announced the sex of the expecting couple's child. All right, non-explosive. Not so bad. Party guests were watching the plane fly overhead from a boat and can be heard cheering, "It's a girl," in footage captured of the incident before the plane inexplicably nosedived into the water. Wow. I don't know why it's inexplicable so far, but that seemed like a relatively harmless stunt. But again, it's a boy, here's a cigar.
It's not bad enough.
It's a girl.
You wind up killing yourself. You wind up killing other people.
I guess so.
It really had nothing to do with your family because you wanted to do this stunt. I mean, I suppose everybody has to make a living.
Yeah, I mean, nothing wrong with doing banners.
I just don't get it.
I don't know either, and I don't know what makes it so dangerous.
I don't know why you're traveling to Cancun in the middle of a pandemic with a bunch of people anyway.
All right, that's another good question.
Who are you, Ted Cruz?
Yeah, maybe that was it. Ted Cruz was in it, and that's how it all got screwed up. But I don't know what. It seems like, I got to tell you, you have to take it all back because it seems on the face of it like, minus the pandemic, all right, let's not blow anything up. Let's have I know we could have one of those banners come by that say it's a girl. Sure. Seems fair. Seems like a good idea. It happens at the beach all the time, right? We got the plane that just fell out of the sky.
It's evolution, right? We've learned that if you blow things up, chances are you're going to die, so that's not a good idea. So instead, let's hire other people to do the risk.
Yeah, fly through the air.
And still have the same stupid idea for no good reason, but at least it's those people who wind up getting put at risk, not us.
I guess that's something.
And what's the worst that could happen? Something horrible will happen, and we get to watch.
I guess, really. I mean, we wonder whether they thought about that. What's the worst that could happen? Plane falls out of the sky? Come on. All right. We'll do it.
Yeah, at least we'll have the video, and it'll be a time you never forget. So, speaking of watching, there's 2 watching incidents which are rather upsetting, and I think that it's worth putting into context here. I can't imagine the people on the boat were pleased about what happened.
No, I don't.
But we have the George Floyd trial taking place in Minneapolis, I guess. There's been so many of these incidents. It's important to remember where they are. Because
Cancun.
Well, no, I mean Minnesota.
That one.
You have cops killing black people.
No,
and there's so many of them. Right. It's hard to remember where the George Floyd trial was.
Oh,
so you got to remember
really?
That. And for the first couple of days of the trial, what they've been doing is interviewing eyewitnesses. And what's so weird and compelling is that all of the eyewitnesses, whether they are the guy who, fingered Floyd for the counterfeit bill in the store,
I would like
who feels terribly regretful and said, I wish I'd have just, taken the money. The deal in the store was if you accept a counterfeit bill, it comes out of your pay.
Yeah, that
and
really
said at the trial, basically, I'd rather pay $20 than watch a guy die. It was terrible.
Yes.
I made a terrible choice. I wish I could take it back.
It's also
and then the people who were the day before watching, even the kids, and saying this is horrible, and I wish I could have done more, and I just feel so guilty that we didn't. So everybody who's seeing it is feeling tremendous remorse, except the cops.
Yeah,
we're making the case through their lawyer that they were just doing their job, and all these angry people were trying to interfere with them, and that's really when things went south.
Killing people, killing suspects is just, it happens. It's a normal part of our day.
Yeah, we had firefighters who clearly don't know their job because they're trying to interfere with the police. Now, cops and firefighters don't always get along, but this is part of the reason why. And so the defense is, well, you're obviously young and female, therefore you couldn't possibly have known what your job is and what your proper relationship is with the cops, and therefore you tried to interfere, and naturally we ignored you. That was basically their tenor. And she was calm, and she was young, but she knew her job, and she defended exactly what she was doing. She's an EMT. Well, you're not a paramedic or a doctor. Well, actually, you want an EMT. If you actually have a medical emergency, you don't want a doctor unless they happen to be a trauma surgeon or something like that. And even then, for heart attacks and choking and stuff like that, you want an EMT. I'm a doctor. Trust me.
Okay.
We've had many incidents over the years in doctors' offices where the EMT came to save the patient, and the other EMT had to basically stop the doctor from interfering. Because that's not what they're trained for. They're trained to do other things. If you're an infectious disease expert, it doesn't mean you're an expert on choking or heart attacks. Let the EMT do their job. So, it was frustrating to watch the defense, but I don't think it worked. I don't think any of this stuff's working.
Okay.
The information is just so compelling. And frankly, I can't watch the trial all day. It's just too upsetting. So, you have that observational thing going on. And then you had the incident in New York, I don't know if we talked about it, where a Filipino woman, AAPI woman, walking past an apartment with a doorman, and a very disturbed person with a previous history of killing his mother comes out with a knife, brandishing a knife, and starts beating up on this elderly Filipino lady, putting her in the hospital. And this video from the apartment, and the security guard looks out at the thing going on in the sidewalk, the incident going on in the sidewalk, and closes the door.
Was it too noisy?
In his defense, and this comes from Mazie Hirono, who would know, Kirk Bardella and Mazie Hirono, both AAPI folks were discussing this on Morning Joe this morning, that they were trying to protect the people in the lobby. That's their job. And the guy had a knife. So they thought that was the right thing to do. And it looked like they were abandoning the woman. And it isn't exactly that. How quickly they called the cops, et cetera, that's a little bit under dispute. But, it was a horrible thing to watch. And there was video of it all around the internet and on TV yesterday. So we're moving because incidents like this happen all the time. It's not like they're new. But we're under Joe Biden and away from Donald Trump, we're moving to an era where people are starting to care about this a little bit more for some reason. I don't know why, but it's like, no, this isn't okay. And you weren't allowed to say, no, this isn't okay a couple of years ago without getting challenged by a bunch of lunatics. We know that because when AAPI, hate bills came up in the House, they were blocked by the Republicans, or at least they didn't vote for it. And say you got lectures about why is this necessary. So we're moving into a new era, a better era, I hope. And, being a bystander just isn't an option. Now, we talked on the show for years and years about the difference between activists and folks who would rather just articulate their desires for change from within, and how they're not the same creature. Advocates work from within, advocates work from without. And being an advocate from within is a difficult situation. Sometimes your work has to be, non-visible, so that you're making your case and you're trying to argue for why this is a good thing. But are we still online? Because I'm getting a message here. We're connecting.
Oh, yeah, we're online.
Good.
It's you and I, like, personally.
Yeah, Skype is telling me we're connecting, so hopefully we are connected.
Well, that's good.
So Deborah Birx is an example of that. She claims that she was trying to do things behind the scene, but in public, she was supporting the president, and so she's getting vilified for that right now. And sometimes you have to be an activist and get out there and speak. And another area that comes up is, of course, Georgia and the voting rights fights. We have J.P. Morgan, Coca-Cola, Delta,
Yes.
All saying this is unacceptable. Joe Biden saying they should move the All-Star game. Fine. But the question is, what were you saying? Biden, at least, isn't guilty of this. But the question is, what were you saying before the law passed? What good is it after the law passes to come out and say, well, I don't like that, it's a bad thing? It's unacceptable. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad to hear your
and Coca-Cola and Delta are trying to make the case that they were advocating behind the scenes. And then after it didn't work, then they went public. And particularly Delta has been subject to Georgia state legislature censure and retaliation.
Oh.
Based in Georgia, tax, breaks and so on and so forth. The Georgia legislature is pretty famous for retribution if you don't go along with what they're trying to do.
Huh.
And so I think that's one of the reasons why the companies, again, not to make excuses for them, but I suspect that that's one of the reasons why the companies are trying to make their pitch quietly. And when it didn't work, then they went public. So again, it looks worse than it may be, but it's still pretty bad that you were not able to make that break and I think more effectively make the case beforehand publicly. Just the North Carolina bathroom bill sort of thing. You have to make the case that if you do this, there's going to be consequences, whether it's NCAA tournaments in your area, whether it's the All-Star game, corporate headquarters, whatever it is. You have to make clear to the legislature there's going to be consequences for this, or maybe you do it, again, the more subtle way of, okay, we're not giving you money anymore.
I guess. I mean, they should have.
But you have to stick to it, not just do it for 2 weeks.
What strange dynamics, though. I mean, it seems to me like every time the question is, well, should corporate taxes be lower? You have these companies saying, we're going to leave this state and move to another state and everything, and the legislature believes it or says they believe it and cuts taxes. And here they're like, this legislature punishes Delta Airlines. Delta Airlines should be these guys should be in their pocket. What's going on? Yeah,
but the thing is that they're so ideological.
Corruption, damn it.
And they claim not to. The businesses, the Chamber of Commerce is a great example. I don't know if you saw with the infrastructure bill. The Chamber of Commerce said, and we talked about this on the show. We knew it was going to happen. We predicted it. You're spending a ton of money, and that's good for the economy, but it's terrible for the bottom line. In terms of deficits and going forward. And besides, yes, you're paying for it, but the Chamber of Commerce said you're not paying for it the right way. Chamber of Commerce says, really, the people benefiting from this are the ones who ought to be paying for this. And my response on Twitter is, businesses benefit from this.
Yeah,
you benefit from roads. You benefit from clean water. You benefit from an area that's good for transportation. You benefit when you are in an area where people want to move to so that you have employees that want to seek work in the area, in the community, maybe even at your place. The idea, this is the Obama, you didn't build it. You didn't build it by yourself is what Obama meant, and it's absolutely true, and they can make fun of it all they want to. It's still true. It's ridiculous. Businesses benefit more than anybody from good infrastructure.
Sure, of course. Your Amazon.
If you don't have a job and you're staying at home and you're stuck in the middle of a pandemic, you don't need good roads. Businesses do.
True. Right. If they want to get 5 stars delivering through Amazon, they do. Like that. No road,
the whole
no
point,
package.
Well, why are they saying that if it's so obviously bogus and against their interest? Because it's ideological.
Why?
In order to support this, you'd have to say that you're supporting Democrats, and they just can't bring themselves to do it.
Well, amazing.
Because even if they pass this wonderful thing for us, 2-3 years from now, they're going to do something that we don't like. So we can't have that. We are Republicans. We support Republicans. We've always supported Republicans. We claim to be nonpartisan and bipartisan. It's not true. And now you're exposing us, and we hate you.
No.
That's basically what they're saying.
I can understand that, at least. I disagree, but that you should hate them. But I get where the hostility would come from. It's a very
hostility is from them.
Yeah, well.
They're telling everybody, especially Democrats, we hate the idea that you're calling us into hypocrisy and making it public. We don't want to go public.
I would hate that.
We want to be privately behind the scenes doing stuff. It's like the Koch network. There was a story recently about the discussions behind the scenes about voting rights and some of the changes, including getting rid of dark money, which is one of the things that's in the new voting rights bill.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
And they were trying to make the case that as lobbyists, it's terrible because the public finds this really popular, and so it's really hard to fight this.
Okay.
And so the best and only way to stop this from happening, because don't forget, we are the dark money, is to do legislative things like block the filibuster, keep the filibuster and block things and use your techniques and use your process and use whatever little tools you have in the Senate to stop this bill from happening, because you can't fight it head on based on the merit. The public wants this.
Okay.
Right? So when you advocate behind the scenes, you're not always advocating in the right way.
Okay. Yeah, that's true. Certainly situational. Sometimes a difficult situation to navigate. I don't know.
Right, and that's part of the problem with looking at places like Delta and Koch and J.P. Morgan.
Yeah.
We were advocating behind the scenes. Yes, but we don't know what you were saying. If you want to get credit
it's not always
for
obvious.
saying the right thing, you got to say it in public where we know what you're saying. That's part of the problem of being an advocate quietly.
Yeah.
Now, you can say, oh, well, it's a lot more effective to do it. Well, show me the effectiveness. The goddamn bill passed, and now we don't know where the hell you stand.
There is that. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Every day, all my reading involves people who are commenting on things anonymously in order to avoid, something. There's 10 different explanations for it, but that's how we learn that you're doing things behind the scenes, I guess. And
But their sentiment is public.
I guess. Yeah, that's true.
Right? This is the opposite. We know who's doing the advocating, but we don't know what they're saying. In the case you cited, we don't know who the advocate is, but we know exactly what they're saying because they made it public.
Well, somebody's got to be saying it, right? But if you could say, corporate executives behind the scenes were saying da 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 da, and he was anonymous so that he didn't reveal which corporation he was for, and we would probably have a pretty good guess. But yeah, I don't know. That's
that's senior White House official stuff.
Yeah. Well, this is senior Coca-Cola officials. I was puzzled from the beginning about what they were doing about these things. I'm just fascinated by the idea that there are corporations the size of Delta Airlines and Coca-Cola who claim to feel intimidated by the Georgia state legislature. I mean,
well, one of my academic friends pointed out very appropriately, the thing with Delta, they're always late.
That could be the part of the problem. That's true. But yeah, well, like Coca-Cola, you would think that Coca-Cola could rule Georgia.
You'd think. Certainly does.
Like I said, where's this corporate corruption when you need it?
But the whole thing about Georgia is that it's the rural areas that have the power, and they're getting upset because they're losing it, whereas Atlanta and the metro area are gaining it. But that balance is still in favor because the legislature hasn't, changed the way Virginia has. Same thing happened in Virginia. For years and years and years, the rural areas had the power, and only recently is Northern Virginia, using its electoral strength to change things. And now you have a Virginia Democratic legislature, and you're doing things like getting rid of the death penalty and making Virginia a place that people want to live. Yes. It's wonderful. But that takes time. Georgia hasn't happened yet. And so you have the Georgia rural areas, driving this, not Delta, no matter how powerful they are in Atlanta.
Yes.
Besides, everybody knows what in Atlanta means, right?
Oh, yeah, right. Wink, wink. We know what that means. Yeah, like Chicago, the national Chicago. The local
San
version
Francisco
of
values.
yeah. Well, yeah. That's true, too. What was I just reading that somewhere that they had was it in Missouri that they had a statewide initiative, a ballot initiative of some kind, and I can't even remember what the subject of it was, but a convincing win for something that was, I can't bring it to mind now, supposed to happen. Voters approved the thing, and then the Republican-controlled legislature basically said, well, rural parts of our state didn't vote for this thing. So, wink, wink, that means the urban part did vote for it. And you know how we feel about their opinions. The legislature now says this thing that was approved by the voters statewide won't happen. We'll reverse it instead. I can't. Someone else in the audience, I'm sure, knows exactly what I'm talking about it because I don't.
That's a daily thing, right?
Yeah, no, but I feel like there's this thread to
you and I
connect
talk,
to
but
it
luckily somebody in the audience knows what we're talking about,
Need
and at
somebody
least can
else to
call in or tweet to correct us so that we know what's going on here.
Yes, please do. I'll figure it out.
So let me cite these two articles just as we get to the close of the first half hour. Delta CEO calls new Georgia voting restrictions unacceptable from Axios. Why it matters? The Atlanta-based airline is one of the largest employers in Georgia, was facing calls for a boycott over its stance on the Republican-crafted law. The CEO, Ed Bastian, sent out a memo last Friday, which he said he understood concerns about the law, but praised several elements and suggested it had improved considerably during the legislative process. So here's a case where, he was saying it was all right somehow. In Wednesday's memo, according to Axios, Bastian reversed himself and said he now recognizes the final bill is unacceptable and does not match Delta's values. So yes, Delta is late for everything.
Okay, well.
Right, and then he specifically says, after having time to now fully understand all that's in the bill, coupled with discussions with leaders and employees in the black community, it's evident that the bill includes provisions that will make it harder for many represented voters, and this is wrong. So good for him for changing his mind, bad for him for not seeing it in the first place. This one is from CBS News, Coca-Cola, Delta, and that's why I say, if you're going to be advocating from behind the scenes, we need to know what you're saying.
Yeah, put it on a Coke can. That'll help.
Coca-Cola, Delta, and J.P. Morgan lead companies in condemning Georgia's voting law. Chase CEO Jamie Dimon said Wednesday voting must be accessible to all Americans, while not specifically referencing Georgia, and he shouldn't because, it's happening all over the country. True. Dimon said Chase stands against efforts that prevent Americans from being able to vote. The question's going to be, guys, where you put your money. Stop supporting Republicans.
Okay, yeah. I mean, you said you were going to do that when they tried to overturn the elections. That's true.
What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do?
I don't know. Don't blow anything up. I know that much. All right, I did find the article. It was in Missouri. I am right about that, and I can tell you what it was if no one beats me to it after this. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Just by way of clearing things up from before the break, yes, I was correct. It was in Missouri, and I knew I had it at somewhere in my head. I shook this thing out. It was a statewide initiative on Medicaid expansion, basically, I guess, accepting the Affordable Care Act's federal subsidies and expanding Medicaid, and it was approved by the voters statewide in Missouri. The Republican legislators in Missouri deciding that the people who voted in favor of it, i.e. the people of Missouri, were too poor and or perhaps brown to be listened to, and that the real Missouri, which lost the election, wanted the Medicaid expansion rejected, and that's what they were going to do. And I guess it probably makes you call into... That's the sort of thing that'll make you think, and maybe this was part of the strategy, what's the point in voting? I just won't bother next time. And on top of that, if they also find that there's a 7-hour line to vote and there are no ballot collection boxes and no one can give them a water or, for that matter, a Coca-Cola or whatever else they might be making in Missouri, St. Louis, I suppose it probably should be illegal to give people Budweiser or something if they're waiting online for voting. But maybe after a vote would be a good time for that, unless they're driving home. But you get the idea. Anyway, yeah, sort of an outrageous and another outrageous attack on democracy by Republicans. Seems weird, but they continue to do it. and in more places than just that. I'll weave that thread together later, unless you're...
Well, that's why I'm okay with Jamie Dimon making it a generic statement, but
sure.
Stop spending your money on Republicans, dude. Put your money where your mouth is.
Yeah.
So speaking of putting your money where your mouth is, this article came across my threshold from Bloomberg. I just love the headline. Demonic origins aside.
What?
The checks, please. Biden's evangelical critics are happy with the COVID checks.
Oh.
Subheader, conservative, small government activists see no moral dilemma. Churches and political groups expect to share in the good fortune. You guys are terrible. You're demons. You're the Antichrist. All of you are horrible things. But, I'll take the check. Thanks.
Yeah, well, shouldn't come as a surprise. Certainly, there's rarely anything less interesting and welcome in an evangelical church than a check written to them.
And they give examples here. In a January Bible study live stream, Virginia pastor, we love people in Virginia, but maybe I'll make an exception for this guy. Virginia pastor E.W. Jackson said a pair of Georgians headed for the U.S. Senate were demonically possessed and their fellow Democrats were cursing the country by supporting abortion access and gay rights. Newly minted Senators Warnock and Ossoff are key to Biden's $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan, which passed the evenly divided Senate with no Republican support. But as the stimulus checks they enabled arrive, Jackson said his followers should have no qualms about accepting the money and passing 10% to his ministry. The 100-member called Church of Chesapeake.
Yes. Well, E.W. Jackson is a big Republican Party guy and was a couple of years ago, what did he run for? Lieutenant governor, I think?
Lieutenant governor, Virginia lieutenant governor, and U.S. Senate.
Oh, I had forgotten that entirely.
Whatever God gives us increase, whatever the source might be, we give some to God to acknowledge it comes in from him, so give me 10% of what you got, because I'm not going to use it for planes and my own personal use or anything.
Right, sure. We give it to God in the form of my bank account. Right.
Right.
This is where this is God's bank account on Earth.
Yeah, we send it to North Pole, Alaska, which is an actual town right outside of Fairbanks.
Do we send? Do they end up with all the Santa mail?
Well, you got to trust Santa. You can't trust anybody else to give it to God, but you can trust Santa.
Yeah, I guess so. That's true. Send it there. That's fine. They could probably use the money a lot more. Wow. Well, okay. So E.W. Jackson, certainly no surprise there, but it probably doesn't surprise anybody. That's happening in a lot of churches. People who, and of course, here with such a highly targeted, and Democrats were very often highly critical of the targeting of these benefits. So you're sending it to people who really can't afford to be parting with this money. That was the whole point of it. But E.W. Jackson says, essentially, give it to me and my Republican operation, whatever. And all right, well, no surprise there. It's a good headline, though. You're right. And then he misspelled demonically. Somebody did, anyway. I don't know whether they quoted him from a written statement, but he says demoniacally somehow possessed. So maybe that's better than demonically possessed, and everybody's in fine shape. But
maybe he spelled diametrically
wrong.
Thing.
That could be. I don't know. There's been a lot of satanic accusations and demonic accusations lately. All I know is there's something circulating about satanic sneakers or something, and I'm behind.
Well, that's from Little Nas X, but I
don't know what that is.
I'm old enough to remember Korn, K-O-R-N, and drawing pentagrams on your book covers in high school.
Okay, yeah.
So that your parents would get upset, or maybe the teachers would get upset. No other reason.
Tipper Gore would get upset. Yeah.
It still works apparently.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know about the sneaker thing, and I think I'm probably all right. Not.
That's all you need to know.
Yeah.
Little Nas X was talking about it in a video, and people got upset about it, and that's all you need to know.
All right.
So I'm going to change topics a little bit
Please.
here. Interesting. Twister Cat, our friend, sent this piece from the Guardian. How many anti-vaxxers does it take to misinform the world?
1.
12.
1.
Majority of anti-vaccine propaganda can apparently be traced back to a handful of people, including Robert F. Kennedy Jr. While deplatforming them is sometimes appropriate, there's a bigger, better solution, and that's Finland's. Finland, which was rated Europe's most resistant nation to fake news last year, is one model of how you do this. In 2014, after an increase in disinformation from Russia, the government embedded media literacy in the national curriculum. Starting in primary school, kids learn the critical thinking skills needed to parse the modern information ecosystem. Students learn how easy it is to manipulate statistics in the math lesson. They learn how to distinguish satire from conspiracy theories in the Finnish lessons. And they look at how images can be used for propaganda in art class. And this sort of education isn't just given to children. Finnish civil servants, journalists, and NGO workers, non-government officials, are also trained to see digital literacy, trained in digital literacy skills.
I read this article, I don't remember, like 2 years ago about how Finland was doing this. Yes, I remember now. Now I rake the forests, but
good.
Rake the internet, I guess.
Right?
This is good.
So speaking of vaccinations, Gallup, I think we mentioned yesterday, satisfaction with U.S. vaccine rollout surges to 68%. It's a big jump in Biden's favor. But I want to instead bring your attention and your listening audience's attention to another issue that doesn't get talked about very much, but I think we should at least mention it.
All right.
And this is an article in Science magazine,
okay,
American Academy for the Advancement of Science. I'm empty. Pandemic scientists are burning out and don't see an end in sight. They give the example of Kritika Kupali, overseeing the rollout of pandemic vaccines at the Medical University of South Carolina, where she's an infectious disease doc. She's also been meeting with vaccine-hesitant hospital staff, sitting on a committee that reviews clinical trials, applying for funding to study patients with long COVID, and handling online harassment that's followed her numerous media appearances and 2 rounds of congressional testimony last summer. So whatever it is, it's worse if you're a female who's in a leadership position here.
Burnout, you mean?
Because dudes come out and harass you. It's
right.
Part
okay.
of life.
Sure, I do. We see that all the time. Twitter will make you pretty aware of that.
Yep. Asked recently during a Zoom interview how she's doing, she paused for nearly 20 seconds, struggling to regain her composure. We've been busting our butts for 12 to 14 months. I just feel like I'm empty. From academic research centers to intensive care units to scientific journals to government agencies, scientists fighting the pandemic say they're hitting a wall 15 months after the first report. The pace that led to the incredible generation of knowledge has put enormous demands on the people who are expected to generate that knowledge, says David O'Connor, viral sequencing expert at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, who's been tracking the spread of the virus, doing Zoom Q&As with the vaccine hesitant, and helping neighborhood schools set up diagnostic testing. It's a terrible time. We should all do what we can to help. Is it going to be sustainable? Remember, a lot of these science folks dropped what they were doing in order to get on the let's help with COVID stuff. Yeah, so that meant they had double duty because they're hired to do this other thing. And they're still expected to produce this other thing, whatever it is that they dropped. So now they're working basically 2 jobs, 24/7, now for a year. And, it's not sustainable.
No. Well, I don't know what to do.
Just like teachers, thinking about not teaching. 1,100 U.S. faculty members found 55% had seriously considered changing careers or retiring early.
If making you a first responder to school shootings didn't do it, maybe this will.
Right. For junior scientists, the crisis has magnified stresses already present in the academic system. Everybody's working nights, weekends, every spare minute. There's no extra pay. There's no guarantee of any extra recognition. These folks don't have tenure. And says Emma Hodcraft, who's one of the best, a computational biologist and postdoc at the University of Bern, who's been tracking SARS-CoV-2 evolution for the Project Next strain. I'm precariously employed. I don't have a long-term job. I feel a lot of pressure. It's my opportunity, and I can't waste it. Says Hodcraft, who's been an author on 18 papers in preprint since February 2020.
That's a lot of papers. What did you say? 18 papers since
February 2020 in a year.
How do you even? Yeah, when do you find time for that? I don't know.
You find time, but that's why it's not sustainable. Some academic scientists, especially those with young children, say their institutions have done little to alleviate the stress. A few attaboys are tossed by the provost to thank faculty. That's about it. And the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine report found a disproportionate deleterious impact of COVID-19 on the careers of women in academic science, technology, engineering, math, and medicine. The demands of reviewing or editing an unceasing glut of coronavirus papers has also been backbreaking for some. They did replace me with 2 people. That tells you what my workload was. Says one biology manuscript editor.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, it's no obvious fixes. It's just one of those things you may not have been aware of, and I just want people to be aware. So when you start arguing with the experts who are on Twitter trying to tell you something, especially when they're women, just think about what you're doing. Think about what you're doing before you tweet anyway, but think about what you're doing.
Yeah. Sometimes that's wise. Usually, right? Yeah, all right, so burning
Meanwhile,
everybody out.
Who's putting pressure? This is an article by Derek Thompson on The Atlantic, the pandemic's wrongest man.
I saw that. Good, I'm glad you're going to do this.
In a crowded field of wrongness, one person stands out, and that's Alex Berenson, who I've encountered on Twitter, too. What a jerk. He gets everything wrong, just like everything wrong. He's not as serious, don't take him seriously stuff. The pandemic has made fools of many forecasters. Just about all the predictions whiffed. Anthony Fauci was wrong about masks. California was wrong about the outdoors. New York was wrong about the subways. I was wrong about, says Derek Thompson, who writes about the economic issues. I was wrong about the necessary cost of pandemic relief. And the Trump White House was wrong about almost everything else. But in the crowded field of wrongness, one voice stands out, and that voice is Alex Berenson.
Yeah. Now, what was his deal? And I know his name from being
he's a former New York Times reporter, which he tells everybody. Yale-educated novelist, avid tweeter, online essayist, and all-around gadfly. Berenson's been serving up COVID-19 hot takes for the past year, predicting the U.S. would not reach 500,000 deaths, arguing that cloth and surgical masks can't protect against the coronavirus. That's what I got into an argument with him over. Berenson is a big megaphone. He has more than 200,000 followers on Twitter, millions of followers through his frequent appearances on Fox News' most-watched shows. He's often on Laura Ingraham. He downplayed the vaccine, suggesting Israel's experience proved they were less effective than initially claimed. On Tucker Carlson, he predicted that the vaccines would cause an uptick in cases of COVID-19-related illness and death. And the vaccines have inspired his most troubling comments, which are all listed here, blaming the vaccines for causing spikes in severe illness, blaming the vaccines for suppressing our immune system, suggesting that countries such as Israel suffered from the early vaccine rollout, even though deaths and hospitalizations among vaccinated groups in Israel have plummeted, says the article, and everybody else is using Israel as a model of how to do it right. Berenson's TV appearances are more misdirection than outright fiction, and his Twitter feed blends internet-y irony and scientific jargon in a way that may obscure what he's actually saying. So they tried to interview him, tried to email several questions to him, and below I will lay out as clearly and fairly as I can his claims about the vaccines and how dangerously, unflaggingly, and superlatively wrong they are. It's a great article.
All right. I'll read that later on. That's I love it when it gets laid out like that and after the fact. It never affects anybody's career whose career ought to be affected, but worthy of note, especially alongside the fact that people who have actually done correct and admirable and helpful scientific work find that they are getting no reward and burning out and leaving the field, whereas the guy who has done no science and been wrong about everything, I guess, is still in it. I don't know where he gets money from, but I'd like to find out, because I guess I could get money from there. I don't have to be right.
Yeah, we used to call it wingnut welfare back in the day, and it still exists.
I guess so.
So it was a funny tweet that just came across my threshold, in line with, masks are good, and the pushback against that, and we talked about pandemic passports yesterday. This tweet reads, it's from New York and L.A., 2121. Darth Vader, Luke, help me take this mask off. Luke, but you'll die. Darth Vader, well, I have rights.
Yes, I have seen that before. As I'm making rounds again. Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. So there's that. And let me just finish with two things. One, we talked about this on the show yesterday. Everything we talked about the show yesterday turns out to be big news today. Pizzagate actually is claiming that he was extorted, but as we said on the show yesterday, that doesn't obscure the fact that his criming on the deal with the 17-year-old girl came first. They're two separate incidences, and whether or not extortion is or isn't part of the mix, that's got nothing to do with what he did with the 17-year-old.
Yeah,
so that's still in the news. It's just that it just gets really, really weird.
We got to claim that the 17-year-old
we talked yesterday about the fact that he went on Tucker Carlson, and Carlson had the Tucker puffer over it, and couldn't understand why he was being sucked into this whole thing. And
you're a pervert too,
CNN,
aren't you?
their media watch was reporting that Carlson was really pissed off afterwards and said, "Why are you doing this?"
Well, it's a good question. This is the best question Tucker Carlson's ever asked. What are you doing? What? Are you crazy? Get off my air.
Yeah, something like that. The other thing I want to mention before I leave is
he's right.
This Politico story.
Yes.
Which I think Armando would take great interest in. Democrats could dethrone Iowa. The party, uncomfortable with the overwhelmingly white state's sway, is thinking about blowing up its presidential primary calendar. Senior party leaders and Democratic National Committee members are privately exploring the idea of pushing South Carolina and Nevada to the front of the primary election schedule. Yeah. A transformation that would include ousting Iowa and New Hampshire from their cherished perches as the first states to vote.
Right. Good. All right. That would be worth trying.
Right? Harry Reid and South Carolina are on board.
Yeah. Well, they've been creeping towards the front of the line for a while now in Nevada.
Well, but I'm saying those are pretty much heavyweights in the Biden ear right now.
Yes, sure. Yeah, to the extent that that's something he'll be willing to make a call on from the White House, which I don't think
will it happen?
So, but...
Well, before you decide whether it'll happen or not, maybe the best thing to do is step back. And I don't have this at the tip of my fingers, but the obvious question comes to mind is, okay, what senators are up for re-election?
That's a good question. Good place
right?
to start.
If there's going to be senatorial contests, for example, in Iowa or New Hampshire, well, there's a big election in Iowa that people care about. All of a sudden, biofuels are back on the agenda for some reason. These things happen.
Yeah,
so we keep an eye on that. Contrariwise, are there big senatorial elections or other important elections coming up in South Carolina or Nevada? That may wind up driving what they do because they are pragmatic and
why not?
Opportunistic. If nothing else, that's their job.
Well, that'll at least give us a reasonable choice, a reasonable excuse for rotating among, 3 sets of states. Maybe that's a great thing. There's a rotation built in. You do want to have the first contests where there are Senate elections going on, and every 2 years that changes, and at least then we won't be locked into this pattern of 1 or 2 states over and over.
See, the problem is that if you have an election, let's say in Nevada and Iowa, right, then you'd have to make Iowa and Nevada first. That would really tick off New Hampshire, but if you don't have an election right then and there, maybe it doesn't matter. But what if you have in all 3? I mean, you can't be in the situation where you're giving your political opponents the opportunity to say, you don't care about Iowa or New Hampshire. Look what you just did.
I don't. Oh, yes, I do. Right. Well, I don't know. Yeah, I guess eventually they will get. I'm sure they'll be disappointed at some point.
That's not a reason to do or not do anything.
Take them
I'm just saying it's going to be in the mix.
Keep
an eye on it.
Yeah. All right. I think we could be able to beat up all of New Hampshire if it comes to it.
Well, let's put it this way: if you're advocating for one state or another behind closed doors, we'd like to know what you're saying.
Oh, well, that's true. We did begin the show saying that we wanted to know what people were saying behind closed doors. That's all right. I don't think that's a big worry to reveal that. Who's advocating?
Well, if Jim Clyburn or Harry Reid want to be for those states, they don't mind saying it in public.
Yeah, right. So
the question is, who's advocating for Iowa and New Hampshire and why?
And why aren't they saying so if they are? I think they are. I think they're out front about that. They want to be important. I can understand that, but I can't understand why you're always the only important one.
Right. Anyway, I'll leave it at that for today.
Okay.
And I'll be back on Monday, and we'll see what happens between now and then. Obviously, more George Floyd trial. Wrenching. If you can watch even a little part of it just to get a sense of it, that'd be good. But don't feel obligated to watch the whole thing. It's really hard.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I've missed my chance to watch the whole thing, but even just one day's worth. I probably ought to check in on that. I don't know. Well, thank you very much for carrying us this far. Now I'm a little confused as to what's happening currently because my Twitter feed has been entirely taken over by. I accidentally made a comment about the Iowa race that's no longer being contested. We'll cover that in the second hour, and it was retweeted by a famous person, I guess. And now I don't know who's trying to tell me what because it's all this now.
Oh, well. Good. You have something to talk about.
Yeah. But at least, we have the subject. At least we've got one out of it. That hasn't been erased. And I guess that's a call for, that's nature's way of telling us to cover that story next. So we can do it.
So I'll look forward to it. Take care.
Very good.
I'll talk to you on Monday.
Okay. We'll do that. That'll be a plan. And that's not a joke, even though he has announced it on April 1st. Thanks, Craig.
All righty. Take care.
Okay. You do the same. Best to Abby. Woof. There was no noise at all. So we know it's not garbage day. That's a Thursday thing. So I'll bark a little bit. I was working on it a little bit. Here's a question. Do people prefer in the podcast to hear Abby when she barks in between our comments, or should I take that out? I edited a couple of very loud barks out yesterday, and then I thought, well, she's kind of a star of the show. I didn't ask people whether they would prefer it, but I don't know. It seemed like it was a really loud one, and it was going to hurt people's ears and their headphones, so I figured on that. And I've been spending a little extra time just trying to clean things up a little bit. I don't know. It occurred to me the other day as I tried to fix something in particular, and then I was like, I really ought to spend some time taking it out, at least in the beginning couple of minutes, as the frog in the throat tries to struggle its way free every morning. I said, nothing much we can do about it in the live broadcast. Those suckers are in for it no matter what. But if you're listening on a podcast, like, maybe you want to, maybe you want the podcast host or some hired editor, which would be a better solution for this, to take out those little things that can be so annoying. And then I asked a couple of people. Most people said, I didn't even really notice that happens. You just brush it aside. It's in conversation, live conversation. It happens all the time. But listening to it on tape, you're just like, boy, I really got to get rid of these things. So, I don't know. But then I've started to realize it's taking up an awful lot of the day going through this stuff and cleaning these things up. So, I don't know. I got mixed feelings about that one. So, if you have any thoughts about that, well, I don't know. Maybe, unless they're, no, you should absolutely put your feet up and relax. Stop doing extra work. Do I really want to hear it? I want to know. I want to know the truth, but then I also I want to get out of this work. But anyway, maybe that's something we can do when we're huge and famous in the future. We'll have an editor who can go through this stuff and spend their time taking all of the little pops and squeaks and whatever other random noises out of things. But also a lot of it is just not really doable. Although I've been thinking about, there's a noise reduction technique in the editing program that I've got where you can take grab some sound, as long as it's isolated essentially, and then highlight a section of the recording and remove the noise from the recording by what they were calling spectral subtraction. And of course it's best if you have the noise in pure form somewhere else. And then when, if Greg or I are talking over it, or if, for instance, both of us are talking over that noise, as sometimes happens, then it's very difficult to remove it from the background. So I was thinking maybe what I ought to do is I ought to spend some time with the microphone on and nobody talking, not during the show, but after the show, and run the microwave in the background and let my toaster beep in the background, and maybe record the doorbell and things like that. And then we could have a recording session recording Abby barking and various other things. And then I could just say, why don't you now have those as sound files? And if we're, once we're editing, then we can say, all right, take the beeping of the toaster out of the background. But although now there are fans of people are fans of hearing the Coke cans opening in the background too. And I don't know. We got to figure out what will we be robbing people of if we did this? And are these quirky characteristics that make the show that much more lovable, or are they annoying things that don't rise to the level of demanding that I spend more time fixing them? We'll see if we can find that out in the future. All right, let's see. So the big famous thing that I was mentioning, I made mention of the Iowa race. We discussed it a little bit. Marionette Miller Meeks, who have, oh yes, and Greg mentions, yes, the washing machine, right, too. So our recording session would include your washing machine, your dog. Your doorbell doesn't ring very often. I don't know if I can recall hearing your doorbell ring. Anything else that we should take care of? There have been a couple of times where it sounded like somebody was tearing off sheets of aluminum foil in the background, but I'm not certain what that was or whether I had to guess right. And that doesn't happen very often, but it seems esoteric. Anyway, I made mention of the Iowa race, which for a while looked like it might end up in a contest before the House Administration Committee, but turns out now that it will not. And I'll fill you in on the details after our top of the hour break as to why that's not going forward. But I just noticed that The Hill was reporting about that and tweeting their headline, Republicans take victory lap after Iowa Democrat drops challenge. And to me, of course, this noted this came across as, well, people who tried to overturn the election results, that is to say the Republicans in the House, take a victory lap after the other people in the House don't try to overturn election results. And I didn't think that was particularly clever or insightful or anything like that, but I guess it got retweeted by, it looks like Jake Tapper did it. So blame it on Jake Tapper. He retweeted it, and now it's become noise in my Twitter feed. He didn't know that was going to happen. He thought he was doing us a favor, I'm sure. And, oh, yes, right, don't forget the telephone ringing. That's true. And that one, I think that was the first one that I started editing it out of that. Greg's telephone, what I can do is, I guess we'll have the channel open, and then I'll call him, and we'll just record the ringing. That's a good one, because that's one that is very obvious in the editing session. You know, you can see it graphically on the screen when the phone is ringing, and then you can isolate that much easier and just erase that out of the thing. And sometimes it takes it all the way out. Sometimes it just dampens the noise so that it's not that grating and jarring on the ear. So anything else? Any other suggestions that you have about things we should record ourselves doing that we don't want to go out on the air, that we should be able to erase from the program? And then, of course, send us $100,000 so that we can pay an editor a tremendous amount of money and he can feel proud and productive for doing this work. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. There's a sound that I can probably edit out of things. Occasionally, the microphone is not that subtle about turning on or off. I've been looking around for a silent mute button, an external mute button of some kind that I could hook up somewhere in between the microphone and the computer that will make no noise when you hit it. But it's not that easy to find, believe it or not, and certainly not that easy to find in like USB form. But something, if I were an audio engineer, I could work on trying to invent for us. Let's see. Yesterday, I didn't grab the story because when I saw it go by, I thought, oh no, okay, I found a way back around to it, I think. I saw this story, this headline from The Hill yesterday, before the victory lap headline. McCarthy, Kevin McCarthy, calls on Pelosi, Nancy Pelosi, to reject efforts to contest Iowa House race. And I knew which one they were talking about, of course, and you did too, because we've discussed it on the air before. And it is, which district it is off my hand, I couldn't recall, but it's Iowa, and now I find out. It's Iowa's 2nd district, and you'll recall the names because they were a little unusual. Currently sitting Representative Marionette Miller Meeks is the one sitting in the seat by virtue of what the Iowa elections authorities decided was a 6-vote victory over Rita Hart, I believe that's the name of the Democratic contestant for the seat. And I mean, I thought this was over quite a while ago. On January 3rd, when they really could have made a big deal out of it, the House Democrats decided, I think in light of all the nonsense from Republicans about overturning the results of the presidential race, the Democrats, I think, thought it might be unseemly to accuse Republicans of wanting to overturn the results of the presidential race at the same time that they would then open themselves up to accusations from Republicans that they wanted to overturn the results of this congressional race, which I'm sure, with the short deadlines and both-siderism of that political reporters are subject to and subject themselves to, probably a good call. It was probably a pretty obvious parallel for them, and it would have resulted in annoying headlines, to say the least. Although, again, on further reflection, I think most people would find, well, gee whiz, reversing the results of the presidential election really not on the same level as reversing the results of the Iowa 2nd District Congressional election to begin with, on top of which is the fact that in order to reverse the results of the presidential election, you would have had to reverse the results of statewide contests in 3, 4, 5 different states and, turn the Electoral College on its head and all sorts of additional, tomfoolery. And I'm sorry, Tom, to put this at your feet, but you should feel the pain of the Karens of the world for a little while. But, it's a much bigger deal than to do that. And, of course, it's a much closer contest in Iowa's 2nd District. 6 votes is, always questionable, I guess. But anyway, Democrats elected not to, on the day of the big swearing in and 3 days prior to the big insurrection, simply use their numbers to reverse the outcome of what the Iowa State Board of Elections or whoever would the responsible authority there had declared to be the outcome of the race, and instead swear in Marionette Miller Meeks. Though they did keep the possibility of challenge alive. It's the right of the Democratic contestant in the campaign to file paperwork anyway, saying I'd like to see the results reviewed by the Congress, and it is the Congress's prerogative to decide the outcome of that election and who they'll seat for that. And it's interesting. It was interesting to watch Republicans get outraged about the notion that the Congress itself could make the decision about who won the race, given that it is, of course, the people of Iowa's 2nd District, and it really is, who are supposed to make that determination, and how outrageous it would be for the legislature to simply reject the will of the people and vote to adopt the opposite outcome and overrule them, except for the fact that we're witnessing Republicans doing that all over the place. We were just a few minutes ago talking about the Republican-controlled Missouri state legislature doing exactly that on Medicaid expansion. But isn't that the different thing than the Iowa's 2nd Congressional District race? No, it's not. And in fact, the statewide contest in Missouri would, by necessity, have involved many, many more people and many, many more votes being overturned than Iowa's 2nd District. But nonetheless, it wasn't a good look at the time. And what made me particularly what made me question the headline yesterday, though, was that essentially Democrats really had decided to do nothing about it. They did allow the contesting of the race to go forward to the House Administration Committee, which I think at the time was expected to basically look at it and say, well, this is a big disappointment for the Democrat in the race, surely. And she's not wrong that there are some things about the way the outcome of the race was determined that are highly questionable, but we're not going to exercise our prerogative to reverse this at this point. We'll make recommendations to the state board about how they should have regarded this issue or that issue, or maybe how they might have approached this thing differently, but we're going to let things lie. But McCarthy, I think, was essentially just looking for an opportunity to showboat and probably knew what the outcome of this contest was going to be and how Democrats were going to handle it, and decided what I'll do is I'll jump out front and make it out like I'm demanding, like I'm the Bigfoot here, pushing the big bad speaker around and warning her, you better not do this or they'll be hell to pay. I'm Kevin McCarthy, and I tell you, no, you cannot do this thing or we will, pull the temple down around us. And Nancy Pelosi, who was already planning, probably, Democrats already planning to say, we're not going to do this, now follow through on that and say, yeah, we're not going to do this. And McCarthy says, I showed you, so it takes a victory lap saying, I'm in control here. I told them just how badly we could, or what we would do to turn their lives into a living hell. And they believed it, and we won this big contest. So yesterday the headline was, McCarthy calls on Pelosi to reject efforts to contest Iowa House race. And I, again, thought, but there's nothing happening here. What's he talking about? And, I don't know whether we bother reading the article because it's been passed by in events at this point. But yesterday it was all about, oh, you better not. We're going to kick your butt if you do this, and something Constitution, and Rita Hart, she's such a jerk, and the people have spoken, and blah, blah, blah. Now, Pelosi in the article had pushed back, not convincingly really, but just basically said, by way of comments on this thing, basically said, well, look, if I wanted to be unfair about this, which is what your accusation is, I wouldn't have seated Miller Meeks. I wouldn't have seated, she just says, the Republican from Iowa. But we didn't want to do that. We just said, let's go through this process. So I want credit for that. And, sometimes she's a little blunt about things like that. But I guess, sure, that's the basics of it, right? If she wanted to be unfair, she could have just said, as a matter of the party position, this is what we're doing, and we're overturning the results of the election, and we're fine with that, and all we need is a majority to do it, so we're going to do it, and we'll live with the consequences. But she didn't do it that way. She was going to send it to the House Administration Committee, and in all likelihood they were going to bury the thing. Well, anyway, as it turns out, now he's out there taking a victory lap or whatever, and the victory, though, is that Rita Hart has dropped her challenge. And that's written up in the Washington Post, and maybe we can get some sense of what drove that decision. Iowa Democrat drops attempt to contest House race, citing toxic campaign of political disinformation. Sounds a little complicated. Now, it is a story where the headline is about the Iowa Democrat, that's Rita Hart, but the picture is of Marionette Miller Meeks, for whatever reason. She's involved in this too, but still, if you're referred to in the headline, I think you belong in the picture. Democrat Rita Hart has dropped her challenge in the Iowa 2nd Congressional District race, asking the House to no longer consider an investigation into the outcome of her race against Republican Marionette Miller Meeks following intense Republican pushback. Okay. In a statement released Wednesday, Hart said she decided to inform the House Administration Committee to no longer investigate her case after having numerous conversations with people about the future of the investigation. She also blamed Republican criticism in announcing her decision to drop the appeal. I don't know if that should weigh in or not, but, there was going to be criticism. But if the criticism was coming in the form of, I'll blow up your house, well, maybe that's different. Despite our best efforts to have every vote counted, the reality is that the toxic campaign of political disinformation to attack this constitutional review of the closest congressional contest in 100 years has effectively silenced the voices of Iowans, Hart said. That seems tragic. Miller Meeks was declared the winner over Hart following a recount in November, with a difference of just 6 votes out of 400,000 cast. Miller Meeks is now serving as the district's representative, so what's your problem? But Hart had asked the House to overturn the result. Hart alleges that 22 legally cast ballots were not considered during the initial November canvass and subsequent recount, resulting in the tightest congressional electoral outcome in modern history. And again, you want to respect the process as much as you can, and you begin the inquiry by saying, well, the state has certified her as the winner. And you kind of, when you can, you want to let that rest, especially when you are fighting against a Republican effort to overturn the state certifications of Joe Biden's win in the presidential contest as baseless nonsense. But, there is room to make a real claim. Now, as it happens, the claims being made by Republicans just were not real ones, and any one state being overturned wasn't going to change the outcome of the presidential race anyway. You had to change, 3 or 4 of them. But here, there was at least room for saying, well, I agree that the state did certify the Republican by 6 votes. The question is, were they right in counting this way? Okay, well, that's a fair enough question. Let's take a look. And then the House Administration Committee, of course, could decide either no, they weren't, or yes, they were. And then on top of that, yes, they were, and we're not going to do anything about it. Yes, they were fair, and we are going to do something about it and be unfair and give the seat to the Democrat. Or no, they weren't fair about the counting, but we're going to let sleeping dogs lie. Or no, they weren't fair about it, and we will do something about it. There's a couple of different directions to go here. A person familiar with Hart's decision who spoke on the condition of anonymity, there's anonymity again, to describe private discussions, said she no longer wanted to put her family through mounting negative and what they described as misleading attacks on her request to have the House overturn the election results. Under the Constitution, that fabulous document, I got something about that, by the way. I've read an article about the Constitution. It's interesting. Anyway, I do my own research on the internet. But I'll get back to that. Under the Constitution, the House has the right to determine the outcome of their own members' elections, and losers of a race can file an appeal without having to first sue in state court. I don't know if you knew that. I know you knew about the ability of the House to overturn or determine the winners of its own elections, etc., but you might have thought, well, that's something that can happen as the ultimate authority once the state courts have tried to adjudicate this thing. Nah, you can skip them. They can take it up directly in the House. And that's what happened here. And that's part of what drove Republican anger and annoyance about this thing, but not the whole totality of it. The House Administration Committee has been investigating the results of the race in Iowa's 2nd Congressional District at Hart's request. In recent weeks, Republicans accused Democrats of being hypocrites for considering overturning the results of an election just months after all Democrats voted to impeach President Donald Trump for his role in the January 6th attack on the Capitol, which they said was inspired by his false claims. Well, I guess we said, Democrats said, was inspired by his false claims that his loss to Joe Biden was due to voter fraud. GOP leaders accused Hart of failing to first make an appeal to Iowa state courts and going directly to the democratically controlled House to get the results overturned. But I think a critical read of that paragraph, helps us understand that this isn't a both sides issue. I mean, it is kind of all that the Republicans would have to contest even the right of Democrats to review what happened, which, they don't actually really have they have the right to contest it, I guess. But in terms of being correct about it on the scale of the moral universe, I don't know. You're hypocrites for peacefully examining the results of the race and the forensics used to determine the outcome of the race. Did you do it correctly? We'll have an investigation in a committee somewhere and come to a conclusion. And how dare you? You're such a hypocrite for wanting to investigate this in a committee setting after, weren't you just the ones who were so annoyed that we smashed the windows in and tried to hang the vice president? I mean, come on, both sides. It doesn't really doesn't really match. It doesn't overlap all that closely to me. And of course, again, one congressional district versus 3 to 4 to 10 entire states. And the allegation is the state results should be overturned because massive voter fraud. Millions of illegal immigrants were shipped in by Hugo Chavez, and they parachuted in and voted illegally, et cetera, versus, hey, I think you counted wrong. There are 22 ballots here that I think should be viewed as valid that you just didn't count. And that I think upon review, everybody with sense would see were legally cast and ought to be counted and will possibly change the outcome. Versus 400 million illegal immigrants were brought in and none of them were ever found, and somehow there's no evidence of anything. That's a kind of a different claim. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy stood by Miller Meeks, he has to, in her Davenport, Iowa district earlier Wednesday, where he continued to accuse House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Democrats of wanting to overturn the race to expand their slim majority. And, sure, every vote counts there, but it's not something that you would go to the mat for unless you thought that there was overwhelming evidence that things had been done incorrectly. And even then, I suspect that Democrats may have said, yeah, but, because it's not going to make a huge difference. Probably. Rita, Hart, and Nancy Pelosi finally heard what many Iowans told me today. I bet he didn't speak to any. Marionette Miller Meeks is the duly elected Congresswoman serving Iowa's 2nd Congressional District. Nancy Pelosi's attempted power grab failed, and Iowans in America are better off because of it, McCarthy said in a statement responding to Hart's decision, and a statement that totally ignores the fact that it was obvious that the seat was going to be contested on January 3rd, and nonetheless, mean, nasty, awful, satanic dictator Nancy Pelosi said, you know what? Let's swear in Marionette Miller Meeks. No thanks for that, by the way, and maybe none was due, but no credit for it either. And I think she's right to say that's the hypocrisy here. The National Republican Campaign Committee launched a pressure campaign over a week ago. Wow, a whole week ago for a contest that's been in the national spotlight for months. A week ago, targeting vulnerable Democrats, including 9 who ended up expressing their concerns over the ongoing investigation. It also released a radio ad targeting the sole Iowa Democratic member of the House, Cindy Axne, is that how she pronounces A-X-N-E, accusing her of wanting to steal an election. Why? I don't know. Because she was the sole Democrat in Iowa and they thought they could get a sweep. Of course, what did Cindy Axne do about any of this? She said, it's going to the House Administration Committee. All right, I'll stay here and wait for the results and some instructions on what we're going to do with this thing. That's trying to steal an election versus let's smash in the doors and murder the Senate leadership. And where's Nancy Pelosi? And let's hang Mike Pence. Same, if you ask me. In a statement, NRCC spokesman Mike Berg said that despite Hart's announcement, Republicans won't let voters forget that Democrats will do whatever they can to subvert democracy if given the opportunity, which they were, and they didn't take. And we did not give Republicans the opportunity to subvert democracy. They simply took it and threatened to murder anybody who stood in the way of their attempt. But let's remind the voters that what really they should be concerned about here is there's a Democrat from Iowa that didn't do any of this stuff, and we're not sure how she would have voted. And in any case, it's okay because Democrats didn't bother asking us to make this decision after all. And that's the same thing as an insurrection. During a news conference last week, Pelosi pushed back against Republican criticism that she and fellow Democrats were unfairly allowing the investigation to continue and undermining election integrity. And there's the quote again, right? If I wanted to be unfair, I wouldn't have seated her, and I want some credit for that, and she'll never get it. The panel, that is the House Administration Committee, had just begun the discovery phase of the investigation before Hart's announcement. Committee members had received initial briefs from Hart and Miller Meeks' lawyers and paused consideration of dismissing Miller Meeks' request to dismiss the investigation in an effort to garner more evidence. They are also reviewing an appeal made by Republican candidate Jim Oberweis, who lost against Democratic Representative Lauren Underwood in Illinois, by over 5,000 votes. Like Hart, he also did not sue in state court before filing with the House. Hypocrites, both sides. But Republicans have not targeted his filing nearly as aggressively as the Iowa 2nd race, because they're going to lose it, and they don't want to call attention to that. However, McCarthy did tell Fox News Wednesday that the caucus does not support Oberweis's investigation and acknowledges Underwood as the winner. Okay, so now we're even. Had the committee gone through the investigation process, they could have made a recommendation to the full House about whether to dismiss the case, hold a new election, or seat Hart. However, many swing state Democrats were already voicing opposition to voting for overturning an election if that recommendation was made. With only a 3-vote margin in the House, Democrats would likely not have been successful in reversing the outcome of the race or calling for a new election if the opposition came from some moderates. There being no contestant, there's no longer a contest, and the committee will accordingly recommend that the whole House dispose of the contest and adopt a dismissal resolution reported out by the committee, Administration Committee Chairwoman Zoe Lofgren said in a statement. So that's the outcome of that one. And Rita Hart will get her wish, even if it wasn't truly her wish, and the case will be dismissed. And I don't know, for whatever reason, Republicans will continue to get headlines about how awesome they are and how intimidating they are. And because Democrats not wanting to even give the appearance of any sort of hypocrisy have decided, for whatever reason, either led by Rita Hart or pressuring Rita Hart, I'm not sure which, to do this, have dropped the case. But in the meantime, the headlines are, mean, nasty Democrats try to steal an election just because we tried to murder the vice president for not helping us steal an even bigger election. Oh, I find that weird. All right, I mentioned to you that there was something I wanted to tell you about the Constitution, which is true and interesting and comes in the form of a tweet thread that I spotted the other day and I thought made a good observation and maybe one that's good in the space between now and our break here too. Catherine Valente, who I don't know, but who is a blue check-marked kind of a person and therefore very dangerous. It's a badge. It's just like the Holocaust. She is a New York Times and USA Today best-selling author of the Fairyland novels, space opera, Deathless, and many more. I hope that rings a bell for some of you out there. Not for me, but it sounds good. I wish I was a best-selling author too, I guess, except they'd have to write things, which is annoying. Anyway, Catherine has done that, but has this to say about the Constitution, which you might think was outside her wheelhouse. Maybe not, though. I don't know. Maybe she's a historian and writes space opera, whatever that might be, on the outside. So, okay. It's just a good observation. She says, I love it when people dismiss the founding fathers as old, rich, white men. Now, who might be doing that? All sorts of people, including our good friends among the progressives who say, it usually comes up in the context of Republicans say, well, the Constitution says, or show me in the Constitution where it does say, and it sometimes doesn't say this, and they're right, where you should blah, 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 blah. Oh, yeah, well, the Constitution, the founding fathers, is just a bunch of rich old white men. Okay, it's a fair diss, but is it? Is it true? Well, Catherine takes a pause on that one, and you'll realize that she's quite correct in this. White, yes. Rich, mostly. Old. That's where the problem arises at first. Old. Hamilton and Madison, she reminds us, were 30 and 36 years old at the Constitutional Convention. Thomas Jefferson, 38 at the time. I hope she's not implying he was at the Constitutional Convention. He wasn't. Washington. And I guess maybe at the time, then I don't know. I'll check Wikipedia on this one. Washington, she points out, was younger than Kamala Harris. Yes, we are late starters in life these days. But young, rich white men, which is what they actually were. I mean, I guess at the time that was, considered fully mature because people died at a young age because pandemics, very often, smallpox, etc. But we don't think of them as young, rich, white men. And there's a good reason for that, perhaps. I mean, they're old-timey now for us, and she hits on another reason in a second. We'll continue with this thread afterwards, but good teaser to begin with. As she points out, if you tell the truth on them there and say, well, the Constitution wasn't written by old, rich white men, but rather by young, rich white men, it kind of hits different, doesn't it? That's the way she puts it, and I think it does, and your mind is probably already processing that. Now you have 2 minutes to see if you can think through the same thoughts that Catherine Valente had in this thing, and I bet you will arrive at the same conclusion. It's a weird thing to think about, the Constitution, that infallible document, those infallible founding fathers who we turn to for guidance on everything, were all in their 30s and rich. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. Makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I got distracted reading something else over the break, but time now to turn back to what Catherine Valente had said. Reminder here, I love it when people dismiss the Founding Fathers as old, rich, white men, and then reminding us of exactly how old they actually were. And now the meat of the thing here, I guess, when you realize that the Constitution actually written by some rather young, rich white men, but rich for various reasons, and some of which are a little unsavory, let's say. That would be understating the case, of course, when we're talking about slaveholders. But we'll get to that in just a second. She goes on to say, even young, rich white men even, I guess, today's young, rich white men don't really want young, rich white men to have been the authors of our country. And as she puts it here, Chad, Brad, Blake, and Brody don't have anyone's best interests at heart. Maybe not even their own. And even Trent and Grayson know that. Karen, are you appreciating this? The Chad, Brad, Blake, Brody, Trent, and Grayson's turn on the hot seat here, having their names carry connotation. Old, rich white men, of course, as much as we may oppose their influence, she says, have gravitas. Young, rich white men have what? Well, she cites these are the guys that are much more apt to have NDAs for you to sign. Of course, old, rich white men have NDAs too. We learned a little bit about how many of them they have and how poorly they handle them, at least in the case of old, rich, orange men yesterday. But okay, old, rich, white men have NDAs too, but they own everything, and that does lend a certain gravitas, since they have so much power over us, and we need them to be occasionally magnanimous. But when I said the Founding Fathers were young, rich white men, you didn't think gravitas. And I assume you didn't. I mean, I don't know that I did, right? I don't think so. The irony is, the truth is so much more useful if you want to scoff at the Founding Fathers' supposed genius, right? If you are saying, well, sure, but they were a bunch of old, rich white men and slave owners at that, and maybe they don't know everything about what it takes to ensure freedom and equality, right? And so she's saying, well, why dismiss them as old, rich white men? They're from a long time ago. Their legacy is old, but they were quite young. And we ought to say so. And she supposes that maybe one of the other reasons we think so is that those powdered wigs fooled us all. John Hancock, who I don't think had a powdered wig, or at least not in the renderings I've seen him. But John Hancock was all of 38 when he wrote his name too big on the Declaration of Independence, not the Constitution. Edward Rutledge, 26 years old at the time. And was Rutledge 26 at the time of... Yeah, I think we might be confusing the signers of the Declaration of Independence. Some of them overlapped, along with those who were present at the convention, the Constitutional Convention. But at any rate, their role as founders happened when they were quite young. The founders, as she points out, so Hancock's 38, Edward Rutledge, 26 years old. Earlier, citing the age of Hamilton, 30, and Madison, 36, and I think that would be Constitutional Convention time. Jefferson, 38, though he was in France, but still an important guy, and clearly had been... had really exercised his importance on the Declaration of Independence some years earlier, so he was much younger, and points this out. The founders, if it had happened today, right, the founders were millennials, bro. So how about that? That's interesting. I guess maybe I guess others who knock millennials all the time would say, well, that is the knock. That back in that day, anyway, people of that age were writing Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, which I guess we are supposed to think are very important. Whereas the ones today, they just want avocado toast and don't know how to buy a house. Well, you know, situations change. But we would be dismissing, I guess the larger point is we would find it very easily to dismiss the importance of anything that any of these 30-year-olds had written now, because there are some people who like avocado toast. And so therefore, smart 30-year-olds are not smart 30-year-olds. That's one of the big problems. But this is a good point. Founders were millennials. Ben Franklin, of course, was old, but notably so among the kids. Picture, though, this. If you're trying to, especially if you're looking for a way to knock the founders or not take their influence quite so seriously all the time, picture instead this happening in the modern era. Picture a Twitter war where it's only young, rich, white dudes who think they know a lot about politics. And guess what? You've got the Constitutional Convention. That'll make it a lot easier to critique the document, don't you think? They weren't able to use the excuse of having done their own research on the internet, but they did do their own research. There just was no internet. And okay, research was, studying and reading the classics of Greek literature or whatever, but even that is going to be a fairly limited worldview. Anyway, so yes, essentially, the Constitutional Convention was a Twitter war where only young, rich, white dudes who think they know a lot about politics were present. She says it was a glorified influencer collaboration. Yes, they would all have podcasts now. Not that there's anything wrong with that. When I tell you this country was designed by old, rich white men, you go, yeah, well, that's how the world works. It sucks, but they probably were very wise about some things. But when I tell you this country was designed by rich, young white men, you recoil a little and go, oh no. So that's kind of it for the thing. She throws in one more recap of the whole thing in the old tired, wired meme, right? Tired being the founding fathers were a bunch of old, rich white men who owned slaves and didn't want to pay their taxes. We're all kind of used to that. It's a solid critique and one that's also fairly easily dismissed when necessary. But the wired, the founding fathers were a bunch of very rich, young white men, or rather very young, rich white men who owned slaves and didn't want to pay their taxes. And in retrospect, that makes so much sense, especially the resort of today's very rich, very young white men who call themselves libertarians and originalists, etc., and show me in the Constitution where it says that I can't have sex with a 17-year-old. Right, Matt Gaetz and Pizza Gates coming back again today, as people indeed are able to predict correctly and then provide examples of internet libertarians coming to the defense of Matt Gaetz here by saying Not so much that, oh, well, he was really being extorted and his dad was wearing a wire and the whole thing's nonsense, but rather actually taking what's the difference? Who cares? Why shouldn't you be able to have sex with 17-year-olds and bring them across state lines for that purpose? Because show me in the Constitution where it says you can't. And, oh boy, well, I don't know what to tell you about that. And depending on the founding fathers for that one, I don't know that, honestly, I don't know what the founding fathers would have told you about it. First of all, they were pretty young. They're younger than Matt Gaetz when he was dating 17-year-olds in many cases. And of course, many of them, as we pointed out, were slaveholders. And as we've pointed out, slavery really was a super peculiar institution. And, a lot of sexual abuse tied up in that and might even have been a major motivating factor. I don't know. They kept telling us in school, I guess you can't tell the hormonally challenged kids in high school about the extent to which slavery was an institution that centered rape, as opposed to, well, the price of cotton, you see, we needed affordable cotton for the northern mills, and so there was this economic incentive for the northern people to overlook the slavery of the South. And, all of that played into it. But, it's funny, too, because I think the excuse that they would reject, but understand better is, a lot of people just wanted to keep sex slaves and have people to clean up the dishes around their house. And, whatever other things they could put them to work with and extract wealth from their labor, fine. Oh, is it cotton? Okay, great. Well, we'll make it cotton. Whatever you need to grow, tobacco, whatever you'll pay me for, that I can have people produce for me for free, I'll do. Not because I want to support industrialization in the North and cotton is super important to our geopolitical place in the world, but because I don't know why they want it, but they're paying me for it, and these people will do it for free if I whip them hard enough, and that's just the way it is. I don't know. We've gotten further afield from this, but I don't know. Seems like an interesting point to make, and as people comment in response to her thread, it's, oh God, they were the tech bros of their time. And it's kind of odd to sort of believe this. And somebody else, again, making the same comment. Oh no, they were tech bros disrupting the government industry by pretending to eschew monarchy whilst constantly reinventing feudalism with themselves as lords of the manor. It does seem exceptionally harsh to say things that way, but I think we may have a point in that one. Anyway, I just thought that was kind of interesting and a good observation, and we'll throw it in there in the middle of everything because, we occasionally hearken back to the Constitution and the Convention and the Federalist Papers and thinking about all the federal judges who make their decisions based on the further writings of the tech bros who, are basically actuallying everything about the argument over how we should form our government going forward. And 200 years later, we're still pointing to their snarky blog posts about how we should do things and saying, no, this is it. Who could have known better but the founders? They knew their intentions inside out. But, sometimes at that age, you aren't all that clear about what it is you're doing or why you're doing it. And maybe not thinking that far into the future. It's interesting. Well worth, I think, at least a couple of minutes in thinking about it. Anyway, Matt Gaetz, right? Pretty disgusting. I thought we would check in on that. There is a Washington Post fact checker piece on his claims that he made to Tucker Carlson and to others that he was participating in some sort of an undercover sting operation here, which, as Greg has pointed out, he's doing it wrong. I mean, in order to get away with what happened here or escape blame for what is alleged to have occurred, using the excuse of participating in a secret sting operation, you would have to make the claim, no, none of this stuff ever actually happened, and to prove it, we entered into an agreement with the FBI to conduct this secret sting operation. We were going to catch the people who set us up by lying about what I had done in an attempt to extort money from our family, as opposed to saying, well, these people are also trying to extort. They're trying to extort money, though. The claim still is that the extortion is, I'll help you keep it quiet that you have had this, I don't even know what to call it. I mean, I guess it's still statutory rape, although I don't know the age of consent, whether that enters into it or whether there even should be such a thing or whether they've set the number right or what. But anyway, it keeps, I don't know what to call it because it keeps getting pointed out that if you try to put it gently and say, well, it was at the very least an inappropriate relationship, then people correctly point out that if you're talking about someone who's under the age of consent, and it's a weird concept that you can statutorily decide when people are mature enough to make these decisions. But you got to draw a line somewhere. And if you've decided to draw the line and the person involved here, the victim, falls on the other side of the line, then you're entitled to say, yeah, the decision can't be made competently here. Maybe we've drawn the line wrong, but the law says no. And once you accept that, then it's like, well, all relationships at this point are going to be inappropriate by law. And part of the reasoning here is that there can be no relationship. And to call it a relationship is a mistake and a cover-up in itself. I want to acknowledge that position as well. Anyway, this piece is titled, Matt Gaetz's claim that travel records debunk the allegations against him. It's not. There's no conclusion in the headline. It's just, I guess, a declaration that this is what we'll be examining in this fact-checker piece. The fact-checker in this case, Salvador Rizzo. I don't know whether he says it Rizzo or Rizzo. It's the two Z's thing, and I guess the Italians would say Rizzo, but here in America we often say Rizzo. Anyway, it starts off with a quote from his Gaetz's appearance on Tucker Carlson Tonight, which would have been Tucker Carlson 2 nights ago at this point. It's a horrible allegation, and it's a lie. The New York Times is running a story that I have traveled with a 17-year-old woman, girl in this case, was 17-year-olds garner that label instead, and that is verifiably false. That's what we'll want to get to. I don't know whether he ever does. People can look at my travel records and see that that is not the case. Can they, though? That's a good question. Another claim from an interview at some point. The same interview. I have not had a relationship with a 17-year-old. And a lot of the feminists pointing out that there can be no such thing would say, well, that's true. You haven't. You've had something completely different. That is totally false, and records will bear that out to be false. All right. The Justice Department is investigating Gaetz over an alleged sexual relationship, there's that word again, about 2 years ago with a 17-year-old girl. Gaetz, 38, has confirmed that he is the subject of the investigation. He denies the allegations and says his family is being blackmailed by a former federal prosecutor seeking $25 million. It's a former federal prosecutor. So, I'm going to have to keep reading this because I'm not clear on what is the allegation here. It's not that a current federal prosecutor is charging him or investigating him over this allegation, and that this federal prosecutor allegedly is asking for $25 million to drop the investigation. That would be a power relationship I would understand more readily, but this is a former federal prosecutor saying that they can somehow, like maybe they still have influence in the prosecutor's office with friends and can have the charges dropped in exchange for this $25 million payment to them. How, I don't know, and how much of it is the allegation that some of it's supposed to go to the current federal prosecutor? I don't know. The Gaetz investigation was first reported by the New York Times on Tuesday. That night, Gaetz went on Fox News and called the story verifiably false. He said, people can look at my travel records and see that's not the case. The fact checker could not resist this invitation, which now worries me because it appears that they are going to reduce I guess they have to at some point. But reduce this thing to, well, can travel records verifiably prove that this didn't happen? Our conclusion is that they cannot, and so we'll have to leave it there. Okay, but then what happened, and what about this, extortion story? Why couldn't we examine that one? Anyway, the fact checker could not resist his invitation. We found that Gates' line about travel records is a complete smokescreen. They disprove nothing. Do we really want to go? I don't know whether to go in the rest of this or not. But sometimes I find reading these articles about Gates reveals some very weird buried facts later on. So let's give it a shot. A third-term congressman from the Florida Panhandle, Gates is a frequent guest on right-wing media and an ally of former President Donald Trump. He has not been charged with any crimes. The Washington Post reported that the investigation into Gates began last year when Trump and Attorney General William P. Barr were still in office. That's an important part of this. You shouldn't forget it. I saw Kayleigh McEnany complaining that, can you believe this Biden Justice Department? They got no time to investigate Hunter Biden, but Matt Gates? I mean, come on. They're totally ignoring the part where Trump and Barr decided, I don't know whether Trump had any knowledge of what was going on or not, but the Trump Justice Department under Barr were the ones who said, yep, we should probably investigate this. Authorities were pursuing a criminal case against the Seminole County tax collector, Joel Greenberg. You know about that now. A Gates ally who was indicted last year on allegations of sex trafficking a girl between 14 and 17 years of age. Greenberg pleaded not guilty. That led investigators to Gates and allegations that he had a sexual relationship with a 17-year-old girl and paid for her travel. Once this probe was underway, Gates's family raised allegations that the congressman was being extorted, and the FBI separately is exploring those claims, probably just to be fair, the Post reported, citing a person familiar with the matter. By the way, just while we're at this spot, I will take note of the fact, I put this aside. Somehow I think this is worth noting. Julie K. Brown, the journalist for the Miami Herald, who was so influential in the Epstein case and covered it so very closely and so very well. And everybody, I think, recognized her abilities on covering the Epstein story, has this comment on the Orlando Sentinel's reporting that made the basis of yesterday's story for us about Joel Greenberg, saying just a hunch here, Greenberg, the hunch is, has flipped on Matt Gates. That's how it led to Matt Gates. And it seems like the sort of thing that, given what we learned about Greenberg yesterday, the idea that he could go into these things believing, I can escape some of this and escape some of the heat by saying I'll give you an even bigger fish. Matt Gates is highly believable, if nothing else. Anyway, right, so where were we here? Federal laws prohibit the transportation of minors across state lines to engage in sex and prohibit sex with minors in exchange for anything of value. Seems like pretty good laws. Laws that Gates apparently has been interested in the past in weakening, by the way. We can get to that point, hopefully, before we close things out. Gates challenged the New York Times' reporting that he traveled with a 17-year-old girl and said people can look at my travel records and see that's not the case. He also denied having had a relationship with a 17-year-old girl and said records will bear that out to be false. What sort of records? I don't know. Let's find out. In the same Fox News interview, Gates said that providing for flights and hotel rooms for people that you're dating who are of legal age is not a crime. The salient, it might just be distasteful, but if they have to be of legal age. All right. The salient details of the Times report were confirmed within hours by the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and CNN. Gates himself confirmed to the Times and others that he is under investigation. He said the Justice Department told his lawyer that Gates was a subject but not a target of the probe, according to the Times. So Gates himself admits that what was reported by the New York Times was true. Meanwhile, by the way, another aspect of the story, Roger Stone, who's involved in all of this somehow, has said that he is targeting the New York Times reporter, and I think it wasn't it Michael Schmidt, who wrote the piece, but that he's going to target the Times and Schmidt personally for some sort of retribution, and how dare he, and da-da-da. But in the meantime, Gates has said, no, Schmidt's right. Just he's a jerk for saying so because other reasons. But that never matters to Roger Stone, and that's one of the big problems with Roger Stone and everybody who knows him and gets involved with him. Anyway, now let's cut to the chase, at least the fact-checking chase in this particular instance, which is, which records is Gates referring to? Where can they be found? And how do they disprove the allegations against him? These are natural questions for pedants like fact-checkers, following his comments on Fox News. Gates says the records would clear his name, but when we asked to see them, neither he nor his staff acknowledged our questions. That's very fishy. Here's the bottom line. House members' personal travel and expenses are not subject to disclosure. Personal, right? So there would be no public records to check regarding Gates's private life. If this was just personal travel and he wasn't using campaign or official funds, there's no disclosure, said Jordan Leibowitz, communications director for the watchdog group Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. CREW, you know them. Airline flight manifests and personal credit card or bank statements would, or at least could, chart who went where with whom, at what times, and at whose expense. But those sensitive records are not public. Only law enforcement investigators could look through them by getting subpoenas. There's no way to know without the DOJ subpoenaing his personal credit card records or those of Joel Greenberg or someone else who may have been involved, Leibowitz said. The disclosures Gates did file with the House Ethics Committee and the Federal Election Commission regarding official trips and campaign expenses or speaking events do not include the information that he told Fox News viewers could be checked. Those forms do not require that Gates list every person who traveled with him on the trips he disclosed. At most, one House ethics form for disclosing gift travel asks that accompanying relatives or family members be listed, like Nestor, but not the girlfriends, if that's what they were, or the girls he's trafficking, if that's what they were. Gift travel filings show that Gates has taken 3 trips paid for by sponsors since taking office in 2017. The first was a trip in August of 2017 to see 3 cities in Israel, paid for by the American Israel Education Foundation. Gates's father, Donald Gates, joined him on that trip, and his expenses also were covered by the foundation, the form shows. There's a little more information that I came across about Gates's father, by the way, too. I said he was a big Politico. I saw a little reporting on him the other day that said he was, at the time of his service in the Senate, state Senate in Florida, the wealthiest member of the state Senate. That's sort of an interesting thing. But what was more interesting to me was that his wealth was derived from heading a nonprofit hospice care outfit, which seems to me like, wow, what's going on at this nonprofit hospice care outfit that has made him the richest person in the state legislature? What about the nonprofit part of that? Anyway, the second trip that he took was in January of 2018 to Las Vegas for the annual Consumer Electronics Show. The trip was sponsored by the Consumer Technology Association. Gates indicated that no relatives joined him on that trip. The third was to Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut on February of 2019. Gates indicated, again, no family members joined him. Separately, Gates did not disclose any travel payments or reimbursements on his financial disclosure forms for 2019, 18, or 17. Last, his campaign expenditure reports to the FEC do not provide any proof that Gates suggested was out there. For example, the report of the fourth quarter of 2019 itemizes various airfare expenses, including listing the airline and cost, but not who was traveling. The whole issue is a bit of a catch-22. Gates is not actually required to file disclosures concerning his private life and expenses, but if he somehow used campaign or taxpayer funds for personal matters, there might be a paper trail to follow. However, using campaign or taxpayer funds for personal matters would be a crime unto itself. Former Congressman Duncan Hunter, of course, pleaded guilty to various campaign finance violations last year, including using campaign funds to pay for trips, dinners, and drinks for his mistresses. He was sentenced to 11 months in prison, but guess what? Pardoned by Trump. Anyway, I guess what they're basically going to say here, should we get to the bottom and find out what the Pinocchio test is? What are we going to give them on the Pinocchios? Do they do it graphically anymore? 4 Pinocchios, basically, for what he got, what he said there. But basically, you should recognize that what he's set up there is an impossible to disprove situation, right? Travel records will show that I didn't do this. Well, 1, there aren't going to be any records. And 2, they wouldn't show much even if there were some records. And 3, he'll resist your being able to get a hold of those records regardless. And even if they were to come out, they wouldn't necessarily prove anything, at which point he would say, see, nothing can be proven. But no, you actually said that this would disprove the allegations, and you knew very well when you said that travel records would disprove them that they never could. And you were just going to get ourselves tied up in, well, should he really have gotten 4 Pinocchios for it, and da-da-da-da, losing sight of the fact that, well, again, sir, the allegation is that you were taking a 17-year-old girl across state lines and trafficking her for sex. That's the bad part? Could we get to that? Well, we're out of time, and we'll have to leave it there. That's the way it is in most media, and no different here, I guess, but I think we all know what he really
From
did.
networksradio.com.
Let's just throw that out there and accuse him unfairly.
You've been listening to Kagro in the morning with David Walton.
All right, well, I'm sure there'll be much fairer with him on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam coming up next. In fact, he might not even get any treatment under this subject at all. Let's see, what is on top of the hits here? The new lawsuit by 2 Capitol Police officers holding Donald Trump directly responsible for that riot, coming up next.